All right, thank you all and welcome to this month's 3DHP for the Nation info. Before we get into our main presentation, I wanted to run through quickly a couple of updates on where we've been with project activities. As you know, we do have the monthly forum to showcase our activities happening with stakeholders as well as the 3DHP program development. If you've missed any of these or interested in a specific topic, please go check out the NSGIC knowledge base. They're all there with recordings. Most have PowerPoints and Q&A docs as well. I will put a list of links in the chat in just a moment so you can access these resources. And why don't I just do that now? I'll put these links in and you'll know where to go. Okay, we'll refer to some of these as we move along. One of our other activities is to manage the 3DHP for the Nation interest group, and this is a general interest group to discuss program, project updates, related activities. We did hold a meeting at the annual NSGIC annual conference during the 3D&TM breakfast, and we got to check in with folks on what they were doing and give them some brief project updates. We'll have another interest group meeting in November in place of the forum. As you know, we interrupt the forum 3 times a year to make sure we get the interest group activities. The difference being the forum is a presentation to you from some of our active participants, and the interest group meeting is more a place where we exchange information back and forth. If you're not a member of the interest group, you can join at mynsgic.org. We also work closely with the hydrography stewards community. They have had several activities. It's open to NSGIC members and non-NSGIC members, as is the 3DHP interest group. I will quickly, I'm working off of one screen today, which is not my usually one. So I'm going to see if Josh or Jane are on. Jane is on, and I see that. Jane, is there anything you'd like to say about the hydrography stewards community?
Well, I have nothing to report. I was hoping to hear what happened at the annual meeting. I believe the hydrography stewards met there, but I was not there. So,
well, we'll have a little annual meeting update here in a slide or two. So we'll make sure we touch on that.
Cool.
And again, with regards to folks, even if you're on 3DHP FTN interest group, this is really for the working stewards. So if you have people in your state that are actively managing your hydrography data, they may be former NHD stewards, but they may be just general, or maybe your state hydrography stewards. So please pass this information on to them. I know that that the group would like to have more input from other state hydrography stewards. Current activities we're working at, most of you are aware that we're working on a culvert mapping good practice community. It's proposed practices and with a minimum attribute set, and we're drafting, going to vet that final draft with a couple of national resource organizations that are active in culvert mapping. So we hope to have that out before the end of the year. We always maintain our inventory of state 3D hydrography experiences. If you're interested in updating or adding information about your EDH or 3DHP activities, you can do so. Basically, you can use the link I provided to go to the 3DHP hub. You can do that information there. And we're also working on the 3D National Topography Model, or the 3D&TM Data Acquisition Planning Guide. This is an expansion of the current 3DEP Planning Guide to include 3DHP and the 3D National Topography Model. And I'll talk in a minute about the activity that we had at the conference. We did have the 3DHP planning workshop. We had over 90 participants, active participants. And what we did during that workshop was basically break into discussion group to discuss what would you like to see in a planning guide for either 3DEP or 3HP. What's the information that a plan that you would need or would value? And so those responses are currently being incorporated into the current draft. Jordan Regine with 3DEP has collated those, and we're gonna figure out what we can basically get into our draft. Jane, what we had was a 3D NTM breakfast breakout. There we exchanged information. You're probably more interested in our offsite activity. We had 30 participants stroll the river walk, take selfies. Excuse me. I had hoped to grab some of the selfies. We had competitive selfies along hydrography features. I had hoped to grab those and put them in here, but could not make the transfer. So anyhow, a good time was had by all. We did have a discussion. I think there was far more interest in the rubber ducky regatta. So I can't really report to you our meeting notes. Anybody that was there have anything they'd like to share? Jane, feel free to come off mute. I think they were too busy with rubber ducks. So, and then we also had a presentation on the 3DHP project roundup, our project outcomes and resources developed during this 2020-24 period. And that presentation is available in the NSGIC knowledge base. So again, thanks to you all for your active participation. We had a very busy 3DHP conference and lots of good outcomes. So before I move in, is there any questions about activities that we're doing or things we're working on or when you expect to see things? Feel free to come off if you have a question. All right, with that said, I would like to introduce Alfredo Herrera, who is the Geographic Information Officer of Connecticut, and Diava Lambert, and she's the Principal State Steward for the USGS NHEWB in Connecticut. They're going to be talking to us today about crossing state lines and how they're coordinating across state lines for regional hydrography mapping. As most of you are aware, 3DHP is a little different than 3DEP in that data is collected by HUC zone, and so those HUC zones don't tend to stay in state lines. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over.
Okay, we're ready, Alfredo.
All right, so I guess I am up first. So thank you. We're going to be talking about the collaboration that we did with our fellow New England states on submitting a joint DCA for the 3DHP this year. So if you go to the next slide, we'll just start with a little bit of a story time. So this has been kind of, as you can imagine, like how we got to getting the collaborative even put together was a long and winding road. Started out really from conversations between myself and Garth Hoxie Quinn from State of Rhode Island, and also with Sue Buto while we were all at the NSGIC annual conference in 2023 in New Orleans. And it was really kind of just driven by the, like, what if, like Connecticut River goes all the way up to, Canada. What if we did the whole basin? And then it's just sort of like, well, we got to collaborate across, like state lines for that at least, for like 4 different states. And then Rhode Island has got things in common with us and with Massachusetts. So it was really just kind of like throwing the idea around and kind of really forming it. And we were like, as these things typically happen, and as the kind of the picture alludes to here, it's like, yeah, we should totally do this. And then we all get home and get busy and we totally forget about it for a while. So from, what I would say is that this idea never fully went away. We kind of helped we kind of kept in very loose communication about it and just kind of kept throwing the idea around, at least between Garth and myself, and also with Sue, mostly because, you know, like had the realization that all of us New England states had very recent high quality LiDAR data that was either going into or already in the 3DEP program. So we were like, hey, we're kind of uniquely positioned to kind of contribute as a group here. So you fast forward to the NSGIC mid-year in DC, and you know the conversation continued, and then you know John Adams from Vermont and his counterpart Tim uh, kind of started the conversation saying, hey, I heard that you were kind of interested in this. Are you guys still interested? And we're like, yeah, we definitely are. And you know, we reached out and talked with Cy about it, and he was definitely interested. And so, you know, we had definitely the sense that there was a lot of interest in this kind of thing. And um, so, you know, we kept the conversation going. And then when we got back, this time, thanks to Garth, we did not forget, and we started an email chain, you know, between myself and Cy and Garth, and to kind of start the conversation. And then we're like, hey, we should bring in Adam into this conversation because he was kind of talking to me about it. And then we were like, hey, is there anybody in New Hampshire? Is there anybody in Maine? Let's bring everybody to the party. You know, the kind of preliminary guidance that we got is like, well, let's try and do like that whole Huck one, everything east of New York all in one shot. So we're like, all right, let's try. Let's see if we can find somebody in all of the other states. And sure enough, we got someone from Maine and we got someone from New Hampshire. And we started to get a conversation going amongst us. If you can go to the next slide. So here is kind of like a kind of a textual version of what was going on and who all the players are. So as you can see up at the top, we were kind of in communication with both Sue and Adam Betham from USGS, just kind of talk about, you know, like what some of like the extremely high level goals are, like what, you know, how would this be received and those kinds of things. And then, you know, we got on a Teams call that was kind of amazing. I don't know how much people know culturally about New England, but we tend not to talk to each other a whole heck of a lot. So having all 6 states um, um, in a single call talking to each other about a single topic and being very positive and proactive was nothing short of earth-shattering. So you know, it was very reassuring. It was very kind of energizing, and you know, we had a lot of momentum, and we started kind of really digging in, and we were like, you know what, we, you know, like if we're actually going to do this, let's set up some working groups, let's delegate some people to actually kind of do some things. So you know, we kind of like Dava and Carl on my staff, and you know, Garth and Tom Mueller from Mass, and Shane and John and Steve and Jay Clark all got together. They started hammering out a lot of the details. And you know, from, you know, the whole thing had its twists and turns, which we'll talk about some of it a little bit more in depth later. But you know, at this point, as we were kind of making some of these preliminary plans and heading into the Esri UC this year, it was all, you know, super positive. Everybody was really working hard and trying to make it happen. And we, you know, we had the sense that we could actually do this. And you know, and by that point, some of the information that we were trying to do this had leaked out. So, you know, we were getting some kind of excitement coming around from the periphery as well. So, I would say that overall, it's been kind of an interesting adventure, at least from the inception point of view, of like how this happened. And it really was just kind of like starting in a conversation in, you know, that hotel in New Orleans, going like, what if? And you know, being able to leverage that into a thing that actually happened is you know, very satisfying to say the least. So without all that being said, there is more to this story, and I'll be back later to tell a little bit more of it from the storage standpoint. But I think the Ava is going to kind of dig into some of the details of how things kind of proceeded from there.
Great, thanks, Alfredo. So for the New England 3DHP Regional Partnership, the New England states first met in mid-June. That initial meeting involved a discussion on states' individual needs for modernizing their water data infrastructure and the status of the state's acquisition of high-quality digital elevation or 3DEP data, enabling the acquisition of 3D hydrography data. The second meeting in early July involved discussion about the state's experiences with the different USGS geospatial products and services contract service providers in order to identify a preferred gypsy contractor to participate in the planning and partnership of the 3DHP acquisition project. Meetings prior to the 3D National Topography Model data collaboration announcement on August 6th also involved examining the 3DHP DCA application requirements and the project evaluation considerations. Having a good understanding of the application requirements and the evaluation considerations prior to the announcement on August 6th was integral for a partnership of several states to be able to complete the application by the September 13th deadline. Over the summer, the states also deliberated on priority hydrologic units for mapping from a state's needs perspective. For the 3DHP DCA, consideration is given to applicants who engage in multi-state or federal funding coalitions where project areas cross state boundaries. 22 of 53 subbasins or 8-digit hydrologic units are shared across the states within the New England region. Consideration is also given to projects that overlap federal high priority areas for 3DHP acquisition. So these areas were reviewed in part with identifying areas of interest for hydrography mapping. Directly following the FY25 3D NTM data collaboration announcement, the state selected Connecticut to be the lead on the DCA application for the New England 3DHP Regional Partnership and to facilitate completing the DCA application. Identifying a lead applicant for the partnership was a requirement for submitting the DCA application, and selecting one individual to facilitate and organize all the necessary information from the separate states was prudent for completing the application within the 38-day timeframe between the announcement and the submission deadline. The Connecticut GIS Office and State Geographic Information Officer, Alfredo Herrera, served as the lead applicant, and I facilitated completing and submitting the DCA application as Connecticut's principal hydrography steward. Subsequent meetings of the partnership involved the USGS National Map Liaison to assist the partnership through the application process and to answer questions regarding USGS cost share expectations and potential federal partnerships for 3DHP acquisition of high priority areas. Coordinating with the USGS liaison was valuable for navigating the DCA process. Now Alfredo will talk about navigating some of the challenges of that process.
So one of the probably the biggest challenges kind of early on, and I kind of skipped over this part in my previous part of the story, is that as we were gathering the materials and kind of making decisions about what hydrologic units that we wanted to do and how we wanted to kind of capture this information across the state boundaries. Interestingly, New Hampshire came across some kind of legal and policy-based issues that they decided that they were not going to be able to reconcile in time for the application. So they kind of, so they withdrew. from this year's application. They indicated that their willingness to participate in future joint applications, and I think we will probably see them back on the table. We anticipate the following year. But I mean, I think really it was down to like they had to figure out what the reclassification of these streams was going to mean for them from both a policy and legal perspective, and that is a very significant issue that has to be addressed. And because of that, it posed the very significant challenge of we could not touch New Hampshire. Next slide, please. But as you can see, the Huck 8s do not respect such considerations. The water doesn't care. It tends to flow across where it's going to flow. So the hydrologic units were it just wasn't possible to select Huck 8s that would have worked to kind of capture parts in Maine and New Hampshire. There was almost nothing in Maine that could have been done that wasn't interior to Maine that would have not touched New Hampshire because that's their only boundary. So we had to come up with a plan to kind of deal with that. And the decision was made to switch the application to the Huck 10 level. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, by deciding to go into the Huck 10 level, we were able to capture areas in both Vermont and in Maine that are adjacent to New Hampshire, but not at all crossing into it, which is kind of where the problem was. It wasn't because, as you remember, the problem wasn't just that they couldn't contribute to the project from a funding perspective, is that they had a very real policy and legal issue that they had to sort out. So we just couldn't touch it. So for that reason, we made the switch to Huck 10s. And because of that, we were able to kind of still proceed with the collaborative project and do serious and significant work, but also respect the wishes of our neighboring state. Back to you.
So obtaining an estimate of the project costs per square mile was necessary for project planning and identifying partner funding needs. The partnership obtained a project planning estimate from the USGS Geospatial Products and Services Contracts Commercial Partnership Team, as well as a cost estimate from a Gypsy hydrography service provider. Having this information early in the application development was pertinent to confirming the hydrologic units selected from each state for the defined project area and identifying the specific funding contribution needed from each state. Again, having one individual facilitating this information for the 5 states was advantageous. It's also advantageous to validate the partner funding for the project early in the application process, especially where multiple states are involved. Evaluation criteria for the DCA application include the maturity of the project submission and maturity of the funding sources. A mature project submission will have a large proportion of guaranteed funding. And I'm just going to hand it back to Alfredo to have Alfredo talk about some of these issues that Connecticut dealt with a little late in the game.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the challenges that we ran across is that we were originally going to use one pot of funding that we had allocated. We had it, we were sure we were going to be able to use it, but then, it was ARPA funding. It was allowed to use, but the challenge that we then had is that we had to execute the joint funding agreement with USGS, and because the federal budget is currently frozen at the moment, we could not do that before the end of the year, which is the ARPA cutoff for obligation, which was going to put us in a kind of a tough spot in terms of being able to actually fund our part of the project. Because of that, we had to scramble and find state funds. One thing I will say about that process, if I had known that this would be the case sooner, we would have found the state matching funds way earlier, and we would have done that legwork with a little bit more calmer. But at the same time, sometimes it takes an emergency to actually do those things. So as the adage goes, if you're going to ask for money and, ask for the proverbial bike for mom and dad, you're going to ask for the best thing you possibly can. So we decided to ask for the whole flipping state, except for the parts that touch New York, because that wasn't part of the original scope. So we went and we found very quickly the necessary matching funds from state sources to kind of fulfill this need and actually do, I think it was 26 or so different Huck 10s within the state of Connecticut, and some of which kind of leap into both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So yeah, like the Ava said in the previous slide, the biggest thing is, make sure that you really have a good idea of what your funding sources are and what some of the logistics involved with the funding sources and what those deadlines are, because they can come back to bite you as they did us. So thankfully we were able to kind of work it out and not have to do kind of back out of our funding any parts of ours, but I'm just grateful that we were able to pull it off in the end.
Yes, so here you see the New England 3DHP Regional Partnership has selected 62 Huck 10 watersheds, of which 18 cross state boundaries as the defined project area for 3DHP acquisition. The DPA includes watersheds within 9 different subbasins, as well as Huck 10 watersheds within portions of 7 additional subbasins. The proposed area is comprised of 8,563 square miles, of which over 2,812 square miles fall within federal consolidated high priority data acquisition areas, and 3,194 square miles fall within federal data acquisition priority areas. And as Alfredo mentioned, Connecticut chose to go big or go home. At the very last minute, he was able to pull together all of our funding through the Office of Policy and Management, working through and with different state agencies, so that we could do as much of our state as possible. And with that concludes our experience on crossing state lines to coordinate with neighboring states in regional hydrography mapping. Now Alfredo and I can attempt to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you both. Appreciate that information. We do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to encourage folks to add their questions to the chat, please. First of all, if I can get to the right place in the document. So Jennifer had a question. Did you have to overcome challenges with missing or redacted data?
I don't think that was necessarily the case in our region. We generally don't have much redacted data, if any, and all of the data that was already in 3DEP was more than sufficient for the project, with the exception of the Connecticut data. But there is a 2023 flight that is beyond QL1 spec that is in the process of getting into 3DEP. So that was definitely part of that. But we were all within 2 or 3 years, all at QL1, and there were pretty much no missing areas. So that was, it's kind of like it's like a nice problem to have, that we're all small states and kind of can afford to get away with the nonsense of having very good coverage.
I guess related to that, she also asked, did you have any co-registration challenges with overlapping areas having differences in elevation precision?
Not really, because all of the data was at least QL1, and thanks in no small part because that is a spec both on the ASPRS and the USGS side. That really helps to level the playing field, and because the idea for the 3DHP team is to use the 3DEP data, that is all kind of harmonized to a certain degree. So that's kind of a non-issue by design.
Well, we're appreciating Jennifer's active participation today. She's got another question she'd like to direct to USGS, and I see that both Sue and Steve are on. The question is the CR affecting every application? Does this result in a higher match ratio needed for non-federal partners?
Thanks, Jennifer. The CR is affecting our ability to definitively approve applications at this moment. We're in the midst of reviewing all our DCA applications for FY25, but it's to be determined how soon we can officially approve or not any application. The CR doesn't necessarily affect the matching ratio required for a DCA application. USGS has to have a less than 50% funding on a project that's done in partnership with the state. However, we do take into consideration those cost ratios or those partnering ratios, and the more the partners bring to the table, the more consideration is given to some degree to those applications, and hope that answers your question.
Zolt asks, what is the proposed timeline to complete the work?
So for the 3DHP acquisition, if the partnership's application is accepted, the contractor would not likely begin the work until next summer in 2025, well after the joint funding agreements between each of the states with USGS would be executed. And then I believe the timeline for collecting the work would be at least a year, and then processing the data would be an additional year. And Sue would probably be able to better answer that question.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And usually the terms of our projects are around a 2-year period of performance. So, and it depends, you know, very large area may take a little longer to get through the process. But certainly we'd expect to be completed within about that time frame.
All right, Jane asked, did you have any problems with 3DHP data model and specs not meeting any of the state's hydrography requirements?
I'll let Diava tackle this one because I'm not familiar.
Okay, so there's no anticipated issues. The 3DHP data model and specs actually exceed most of the state's hydrography requirements for the New England states, and especially for Connecticut in particular.
Yeah, we also anecdotally haven't heard from any of our neighboring states that is going to be an issue.
And we didn't create any seamless DEMs, even though some of our areas do cross state boundaries. I think since all of the New England states have QL1 or higher quality LiDAR elevation data, that it will be pretty seamless already, since the data was either acquired through the 3DEP program or it was acquired using a gypsy contractor that is familiar with the 3DHP requirements. So we're not expecting to see any issues in that regard.
Yeah, the thing I will add there too is that, you know, the extra resolution that these data sets have captured at also help to kind of mitigate some of those differentiation issues and allow us a better chance of kind of meshing the data sets together, if that, for lack of a better way of saying it. So the extra resolution really helps on kind of doing exactly that. It just gives us the latitude to align those things, and the margin of error is still high enough that it's still more than good enough to run the models.
And when you say latitude, I assume you're not talking geographic.
No, not cartographic latitude, like
Okay. I think you already
proverbial.
answered this, but Phil asked, did you have to create a seamless 1 meter dam across all the state project boundaries?
Yeah, that's what we just answered, Linda.
And the answer is
Yeah.
no, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
we didn't, and we don't expect that we will need to.
Okay. Jennifer, thank you for showing up today. Minnesota has QL1 or better too, but we see issues with the overlapping collects, especially with different vendors, years, point, density, etc. And they've not been able to assume harmony within our state, let alone across state boundaries. So I think this issue, should like to hear more about what you were able to do, and perhaps the answer is the smaller state and the benefits that that provided, and all having current compliant data.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing there is, one, we're tiny. We can do all our state in one shot. So that's always helpful within our state. But I think the way in which all of us New England states have captured the data, to my understanding, is that because we very heavily leaned on either the 3DEP process itself or the 3DEP and ASBRS specs, they you know, that really goes a long way in kind of helping to align things naturally, even if there are discrepancies. Once again, the added resolution really does go a long way to kind of helping mesh things together in a way that you still end up with a usable product in the end. So, you know, it's one of those things. It's like the extreme high resolution. It's like, so in our case, like the point density is like crazy. It's like 15 points and 20 points per square meter across the board, which is really high statewide. It really affords us just more you know, like more points to choose from to kind of come up with like what the actual point of comparison will be. Which is why we tried to do the tried to do it that way. These are a lot of these things are things that we were, at least we in Connecticut, because we were kind of late to the game and refreshing our data. These were a lot of the considerations that we were thinking of. Like we were very much actively thinking of like these downstream derivative products when we were choosing the specs and the plans for the collection itself. So as much as you can do that there and work with your contractor, especially if they are a gypsy contractor, to kind of think about those things ahead of time, that really does save a lot of headaches on the back end.
Well, I think Minnesota's having some size envy here. Sean also had questions about the disparate LiDAR acquisitions. I'm not sure if you can add any more to that, but you can see his question here. Water will not flow seamlessly between different data collections, no matter the QL.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. You see a lot of us from Minnesota typing in here as we're gathering all this information. This is highly valuable, but
Yeah.
When no matter the sensor, no matter the quality level, you're
Yep.
going to have some amount of differences in the elevation values. And I think we all know that, and we have to remind ourselves about the different quality levels And then how that relates to the tolerance of, may not exceed greater than 10 centimeters. So like in Minnesota, all of our data is coming in for quality level, very highly accurate data, much as they're describing. Certainly less than 10 centimeters, substantially less. But no matter what, when we line those collections and align them with the overlap, which is what they're required to have, so the data can be stitched together as part of LiDAR-based specification, we see differences in the elevation values. It does between one collection and the next. It doesn't mean that one is wrong or one is right or better than the other. It just has more to do with timing and instrumentation at the time, but it's all 3-depth certified data. But regardless, within the DEM, there will be differences where we will either have waterfalls from one collection to the next. And so if you were to route water without mitigating this one way or another, we're going to have modeled water within the DEM tripping over a waterfall or hitting some sort of false or synthetic embankment where the water is going to deviate in its travels. And I think what we're looking for is how you are trying to manage all of that with all of these different collections. Because this is a real true problem that I think that most people are going to experience across the nation as when you try to bring data together.
And I'm going to combine this with Al's question then about the temporal character of the LiDAR collects in traversing wet seasons over the year. I think is building on what Sean's asking for.
Yeah, that's a good question in terms of like the temporal component. I can speak to ours. Ours was done very intentionally to be, leaf off in the spring, at low tide in the coastal areas specifically. So like, we were very careful to make sure. And I believe, Rhode Island, and I'm sure Garth can speak up if I'm saying anything wrong, but their collection is very similar in nature, where it's definitely, spring and tidally coordinated to make sure that, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, like there's always going to be differences, and that's kind of where the challenge comes in. And, I guess to put it a little bluntly, that's kind of where the vendors that do this work really kind of, that's where they earn their money, I suppose, is kind of navigating these challenges and how do they produce a data set that makes sense.
And that's exactly what Misha responded, that you bet your vendor is going to be handling the alignment and meshing questions. I know Sean, the scientist, wants to know how they're doing that, but that might be a better discussion at another time.
I think it probably is, Linda, but let's as a community not let it be overlooked, and let's not let it become a
Learn
black.
from it.
We should learn so that
Absolutely.
every state and entity out there isn't tripping over this issue and just, where we all just say, well, the vendor somehow made it happen. This really should be known and documented so that we could all benefit from it.
We will gladly add that as a future presentation question. We can invite our private sector partners to talk about how they address that issue.
Thanks, Linda.
I think
Joel asked you.
Every vendor is going to handle that a little bit differently. Some are going to align DEMS. We go back to the point cloud and rebuild from scratch because that eliminates any resampling. I wouldn't expect a standardization across all vendors in their methods.
I'm sorry, was that you? Was that Misha talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's Misha talking.
No, that's fine, and I think that would be good to learn, without going into a lot of detail about your.
I didn't want to overstep my bounds since this was
No, this is helpful. I think that, let's get some multiple perspectives on that, because different things are going to work for different regions, right?
Yeah.
Joe was asking about your gypsy contractor selection process. Had you previously worked with a contractor you eventually selected, and had the contractor previously completed EH in your region or similar?
So,
and I'm going to apologize in advance for the barking dog. I'm in, like I said, not my usual environment. So
I have the same problem, Linda. All of the New England states had worked with either many or all of the gypsy contractors previously in some aspect. And and several of them specifically in the LiDAR elevation data collection. So I think the selection process was basically by majority, one that we had all worked with, and one that did specifically work with EDH in our region.
All right, and I want to add Sean's question about going back to the point cloud. I think Misha brought that up. That was one approach that they used. And Greg's commenting that Minnesota often has flatter terrain and glacial hydromorphic history will make for different challenges, of course, from the New England region. Greg, if there's anything you wanted to add to that, please feel free to come on.
I'm good, but thank you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we're called
I'm sure.
Flatlanders in Connecticut, but I think Minnesota is actually flatter than Connecticut.
They did want to add, Jennifer, when you talked about the temporal distribution, what is the number of years on that temporal? Do you know within the group what the biggest range was?
I think it was 2 to 3 at the most.
Yeah, Massachusetts did a couple of different patches over different years.
Yeah.
And I think
but
Okay.
as well.
Yeah, but everything was within 2 to 3 years of
Right.
Now, essentially. So it's all very, very recent.
Yes. Yeah, I think the oldest might be 2020.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're getting some comments about the sensitivities of certain regions to these temporal considerations. Garth mentions the tidal effect in the spring, and Al being in Florida knows that hurricanes can make a big difference to your geography. Jennifer did, I guess, Misha, can you elaborate how you rebuilt the DEM from scratch? Did you merge and retile, or?
Well, to be clear, we haven't started this project yet, right? We just submitted the DCA for this region. We have done a lot of this work all over the country with all kinds of varying point clouds or varying acquisitions. With respect to tidal change, that changes by the hour. So there's really nothing you can do to perfectly clean that. And that's where interpretation and decision making comes in by an experienced developer in this case. We do collect all the point clouds. We run some, I will call it proprietary meshing and harmonization processes, and then rebuild the DEM from scratch. So, yeah, sorry, everyone's like, how'd you guys do it? And we just haven't done it yet.
We did it from scratch.
Yeah. So,
No, I think you'll see Sean says here, simply knowing that any project went back to the point cloud, that's helpful in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's just, so you have to decide which acquisition is most accurate, which acquisition is most current, and develop a appropriate meshing and prioritization for which one you are going to rely on in overlapping areas. Yes, there is a little bit of magic involved. That's why we have Kathy, who is our magic person. But yeah, we start essentially from scratch, pick the best data available, and start running the models from there. There is no clean automated model that is going to overcome all of these issues, and that's where the experience really comes into play to creating the best data set possible.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer's happy with magic. All right, any additional questions, or if I missed anybody, I apologize. There was good dialogue going on in the chat. If anybody wants to elaborate on any of their questions or their answers, please feel free.
Hey, Linda, this is Sean.
Go ahead.
I appreciate the dialogue we've had towards the end of the meeting, because it really brings to the forefront some very important topics that folks across the nation need to be aware of, and which is what we were just talking about, is how do you bring data together? Do you work with the DMs that you have there, 3-depth certified for any one given quality level? Do you go back to the point cloud? And either way, like was just described, there's going to be different ways of conquering and overcoming these differences. I think it's important that when we conduct outreach around this, is that we make it known that the data is not bad. The data is not wrong. It's quite phenomenal data. It's highly accurate. There's good precision within any one given data collection, but there are profound issues that need to be dealt with when you start to bring data together, especially for hydrologic modeling purposes. And it's really good to get that out in the forefront. So when a presentation is given, that folks have an understanding of what went in to at least at a high level to accomplish the task at hand. And so I'm glad that we heard from a vendor that said we haven't done the work yet, but we're going to go back to the point cloud. That's just tremendously valuable to everybody listening. So now everyone knows that, oh, hey, we got a bunch of data in hand, but it's going to go into the vendor's processes and be massaged so it comes out. There's going to be products that will allow hydrologic applications to extend across borders, and not only political borders, but borders between different collections. So I'm going to stop there. I'm up on my soapbox, and I'll fall off if I keep going.
No, always appreciate it. Yeah, so the data's not perfect, and I think if I'm hearing you correctly, Sean, people need to be aware that it's had to be manipulated at some level.
Yeah, and we never want a funding source to hear experts like what come together in this community to interpret that we say that the data is bad in any way. The data is not bad. There's just some nuances with it that need to be mitigated to overcome to bring it together.
The data is so good that people forget it's a model.
Right.
Well said.
Kind of back to our early days of GIS. If it's in the computer, it must be right.
That's what my Facebook says.
I believe it.
Out of the 3DHP data I have seen come out, I'm really impressed with the quality level. Of course, I don't think I have seen any that actually cross those state lines. So this will be a test to that, certainly, if our application is selected to move forward. But as far as Connecticut and our hydrography, what will be an end product for the 3DHP will be such an improvement upon what we've been using. And I know that's true for several of the other New England states. And I think that's even true for Massachusetts. I think for Massachusetts, Tara Mano, who leads the hydrography program for Massachusetts, they have a larger staff and do an excellent job with their state's hydrography. For Connecticut, it's just been me. So I'm very excited about the 3DHP acquisition.
That's great. Hey, Jennifer, I'm going to invite you to come off of mute. You've shared really great stuff today. So I'd like to elaborate on your last comment, if you would. Jennifer, you still with us? Are you muted? You are muted on my. When
She
I'm
says
looking
she's
at
in
it.
a loud place, so
Oh,
can't
okay.
come off mute.
All right. Well, I think that you've made the point that it'd be nice to know about the point cloud acquisition, and this assumption that more points is better, and that 500-meter overlap is enough, and the processing power. And let's see if we can't get our private sector partners to talk a little. Again, I was looking for the word proprietary earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I will comment about the computing power, I don't want to understate that enough, because even for a place as small as Connecticut, our point cloud at 15 points and 20 points on the coast is still 50 terabytes and a few trillion points. And that is nothing to sneeze at computationally. So, you know, I don't envy having to kind of reconcile, kind of doing the work of reconciling that with that much data. You know, it can't be easy, but I just want to chime in that you can't overstate enough how much data it truly is, especially when you start touching point clouds. It's truly a lot.
You are not wrong, Alfredo. I can also speak a little bit to Jennifer's question statements, but I don't need to be, I'm sure I'm not the only vendor on the call here. More points is better, but really what it comes down to is resolution of ground features. So, you know, can we see the channel? Can we accurately detect the flow paths? We have mixed QL1 and QL2 regularly. That's not a problem. As you get into very dense vegetation, QL2 is going to start to lose resolution in the ground model. I love QL1 and above, but as much for hydrography as all the other analytics that I like to do with LiDAR. 500-meter overlap should be fine for any feathering. We're probably not going to feather that far. We'll probably cut that back significantly, just because there's not a lot of advantage to adding multi-temporal overlap at that scale, if that makes sense. But any other vendor has a differing opinion. Speak up. We've done a lot of it, but we're not the only ones.
Jennifer adds how grateful she is for this conversation and sharing the information and being able to learn from one another. So that's great. Any of private sector folks want to contribute or add on to Misha's comments?
I can
Feel
speak to Sean's comment.
Okay, wait, the latest one. Okay, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the spec for USGS is 1 meter for this data set. Most of the DEMs that we build at this point for other applications outside of just 3DEP are 0.5 meter if supported. Whether even a QL1 data set supports a 0.5 meter, that essentially means that 4 of those LiDAR pulses, if only 8 points per square meter, need to penetrate the canopy and actually return from the ground. So in a lot of areas, that's certainly the case. In dense vegetation, you're still not going to get 4 points per square meter to fully support a 0.5 meter product, which is why I think it makes sense for USGS to define the required specification for these DEMs at 1 meter resolution. You also start to get so much stuff if you go much below that. And every time we cut the cell in half, we quadruple the data volumes and processing times.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. I asked because of the comment you made moments ago that referenced more points are better, and you also made the comment about the ground resolution or the capturing of the features on the ground. I think that all corresponds into what you're describing, but it just seems to me, or it has seemed to me for quite some time, that if the more we can do at the higher resolution, the better. But, you know, we haven't embarked on anything here in the state of Minnesota yet. I've been selling this for quite some time, quite a number of years. I've been an advocate for LiDAR drive hydrography for over 20 years. I've always wanted to bring harmonization to all of the features on the landscape that relate to hydrography data. And yeah,
Sorry. Go ahead.
that's basically it, you know, where just it seems, you know, conventionally that we're operating at a tighter resolution in the DEM will bring us greater ultimate harmonization that will give us a greater shelf life. You know, I think when we try to sell this work to decision makers and funding partners is that they're fearful that we're going to go out and fly new LiDAR next year, and we're going to come back and say, oh, now we have to update our hydrography data again because we have new LiDAR. And I think we all need to find that balance between the amount of points, the resolution of the data, and realize that we're getting to such a point in accuracy that we won't be able to improve much on our representation of the hydrologic features on the landscape. Therefore, it's safe to say that if we invest now at use of quality level 1 at a sound resolution, we may not have to redo this in 10 years or 15 years.
Yeah, and everybody is recognizing the need for harmonization. You know, USGS is investing in how to build a national seamless model. A lot of the impetus for some update cadence is actually change on the landscape, a little less significant when you're talking about upland hydrography, but pretty significant when you're talking about highly dynamic systems in, you know, wide gravel braiding can be really a lot. And then areas that are getting developed require updates. So I agree with you that the more resolution, the better in a lot of cases, but there is that trade-off on level of effort, data volumes relative to the features of interest. And I think where the super high resolution data really shines is more on the finer scale above ground features than the hydrography. But when you're really interested in every little channel, then yeah, the half meter or even below, I can see value in that. It just really depends on the use case.
Yeah, it's so hard, and the reason I just want to add more to this conversation for those listening in is where we've spent years here in Minnesota exploring this is those small channels on the landscape that seem meaningless at times, especially from a nationwide perspective. Those are the channels that are the first source of conveyance for contaminants, pollutants, and sediment that are carrying these things to the next downstream order, which then we know the rest of the story. It all dumps into the next, you know, the next larger conveyance feature. If we're really trying to mitigate pollution and contaminants, as a hydrologist, I've always felt that it's better to go higher in the landscape, identify exactly where this stuff is coming from, instead of just identifying the water course that's carrying it. And so that's why here in Minnesota, especially in a lot of our flatter landscape, is a benefit of getting up into the higher levels of the landscape and mapping those small features, which was where quality level 1.5 meter resolution, as you just said, would shine in that ability.
Makes perfect sense to me. I'll fly everything at 20 points per square meter if you guys want to buy it.
Jennifer asked, okay, resolution is fine, but what about precision? How many decimals in the floating point raster? And anybody feel free to tell me if we've moved into another subject at this point, ready for another a different presentation. And Misha, we certainly appreciate your input, but at any time you'd say, I'd like to go into more detail later, that's fine as well.
I think centimeter resolution is fine. If that question was for me, I don't think there's any reason to go beyond centimeter resolution in your elevation, like the centimeter vertical precision.
All right. She's asking more about the specification.
Sue, you want to remind me on the vertical precision specification? Are you talking about the decimals or the amount of vertical disagreement with the DEM due to monotonic flow? I'm not, can you elaborate, Jennifer? Or if Sue knows what that question is about.
I'm not sure I do, and to be honest with you, I don't think I have those numbers in my head, so I'd have to get back to you. Sylvia had to drop off. She's the one who could probably pop those numbers right out.
All right, we'll go ahead. So Tara adds Massachusetts DOP has QL1 for Central and Western Massachusetts was acquired this spring. It's not yet in the can. Previously, their best available LiDAR map looked like she shared in the graphic. Tara, do you want to expand on that?
Hi, yeah, Tara Mano, Mass DEP steward. I've been working with Deava and others for years, and glad to be working on this collaborative project. It's just really been amazing, and just looking forward to it, you know, as it continues. Just kind of letting people know with this QL1, QL2, how do you mesh things? Some USGS folks were kind enough to take on with FEMA funding some 3DHP data development within the Housatonic and Westfield of Massachusetts. And the data, if you look at the status map I threw in the chat, it is a mix of QL1 and QL2 data, and they found very good. You know, they seem to have the ability to do the work. I look forward to seeing it when it does get ultimately checked into 3DHP database there. So we'll, we're going to have that question some have asked about the temporal nature. If you look at the status map here, some of this acquisition was like 2015, and as we develop the 3DHP data around the borders of the Housatonic and the Westfield, it'll be interesting to see how things look. I mean, they're different Huck 8s, so we shouldn't be crossing, so it shouldn't be a problem. But it'll be interesting to see. That said, you can look at the eastern part of the state. Most of it we were able to reacquire with running around with a hat like Alfredo did recently, and getting various funding sources. Eastern Massachusetts was much more complicated than Western Massachusetts. Nothing at all like the map I've seen of California's LiDAR acquisitions, but it was kind of a bit of a challenging mess. So we're happy to have basically two big chunks that we will be moving, forward with soon. Something I can't avoid saying is that, with the wetlands data not being included in the 3D HP data model, some substantial effort in Massachusetts has been made. I've been in, I don't know, 6 or 7 different meetings with our wetlands program, and sometimes with folks from NSGIC, and sometimes just, DEP having an in-house conversation about what we need. Again, as Jane alluded to before, how, what's with the regulations? New Hampshire was not able to deal with it. Do you have challenges? What are the needs of multiple entities within the state, to say nothing of local regulations? And, the best thing I can say is, taking the time to, reach out to the stakeholders, and, your group will grow over time. You'll have people that will be more actively participating in your meetings. We have meetings every 2, at most 3 months apart. But to listen to what their needs are, and move forward after you've had, time to have those conversations about what everybody needs. Because in our case, we've had 2 iterations of wetlands mapping since the mid to late 90s. And, not to have wetlands within our new hydrographic base map just doesn't make sense for us. And at the same time, we're excited about this opportunity, because previously in NHD, all you had was, intermittent and perennial. So basically it's a deep marsh, or it's something else, or you're looking at NWI. So to be able to develop our wetlands using the something like 27 categories that we have, much simpler model than what NWI uses, and to be developing that as a buy-up at the same time that we're doing the 3D HP. I really can't speak. I just can't say how happy I am that MassGIS fully supports this effort and, finding the funding to do this, because I've tried to incorporate, old 25K hydro data with our, 12K, nominally 5K in places, wetlands data, and it's a nightmare. So it's something you guys might want to think about, especially in, lumpier states where it's really hard to differentiate, minor differences in elevation and what that might mean for ponding. And I don't know. Thinking you guys in Minnesota as well as a bunch of others, just something to think about. It's not just the 3D HP, but it's the other things that you might need. And there's probably cost savings involved in doing it, contemporaneous with your 3D HP acquisition.
I think I see a future forum on lumpy states. How's that? Al entered a comment about the importance of these small flows, and I think, and Sean followed up. Al, I'm just going to ask you if you're okay coming off and just kind of wrapping that, or just kind of sharing that thought with us.
Well, it's just that, in the flat air environments, like Florida, it's the ephemeral flows that are non-channelized. We have a lot of overland flows. Basins, catchments just overflow into the next catchment without a channel conveying the water. So it's those small things, those small hydrological features, flows on the surface that are most significant. The big flows in my water management district, we only have 4 rivers and we've got 10,000 square miles. Everything else is a small flow. So they become really significant. But I think the thing that this group needs to remember is that what's significant for me, or in Minnesota, or in some other very flat terrain, this is a national database. And those are local things that are locally important, but the national database is what we're talking about. So I guess the bottom line that I'm thinking is that, going to a half a meter, like Misha is saying, it's going to quadruple the amount of work and the amount of storage. 1 meter in CONUS, I think, is adequate to identify the national database. And that's just the point.
Right. So are you suggesting that basically there'll be some things that states or regions will have to address on their own?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If like in our water management district, I think, we should be responsible, and we, for whatever our needs are above and beyond the national database.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, Alan. And I'm sure you guys and us can develop to whatever specification locally required, but that we cannot expect USGS to address Florida issues in New Mexico, for example. These are just totally different landscapes. And so when you're considering embarking on one of these, I mean, we've gone way below USGS spec for certain regions because that was relevant to those regions. And so just consider that when you're putting together your overall budget and plan and talking to your vendors or whoever your provider is. But I don't think that USGS should be trying to meet everybody's needs when they're not relevant to over 47 of the 48 CONUS states.
Right.
As much as we know that Sylvia would love to do that, All right, I'm gonna get us back. Just a few closing slides here.
Hey, Linda, this is Sean. Could I just add one last thing? I was trying to get in there in that
Certainly.
important part. Sorry to interrupt you. I agree with those comments made, and if folks are tracking in the chat, you sense that I'm one who wants to map everything. I want to map it all. What I want to make people aware of is when they consider this is this work can happen in parallel. We can collect and map this information and create LiDAR drive hydrography that meets both 3DHP spec and it meets that local need that's being described. What's very difficult is if you don't do it at the same time, funding sources are very unlikely to give you money to go back and do it again to take something to a higher level to meet that need. If everyone is educated up front on that two-pronged approach, you're more likely to have success. And that's what we're trying to set ourselves up here in the state of Minnesota, is that we go through the funding source process. We make submissions through 3DHP, DCA, and we have money sitting there ready to go that helps us take it to the next step further to map those defined ephemeral channels, which is a little bit different than Al was describing in Florida. But then we have it all. We'll never ever get money to go back and try to do it again. Not within a decade anyway. And I just wanted to add that for consideration for those who might want to take this on as and try to meet the needs that have been described here, which we could define as local needs. And I'll stop there. Thanks for letting me interject.
No, that's great. And I've made a note of that, Sean, because I think that's something that as we develop this planning guide I mentioned, we've not truly addressed, and perhaps we can provide a little guidance there and some examples of things that, that you may want to look at your own regional, local data needs at the same time, and what you need out of 3DHP to accomplish what you would need to do for your constituents and stakeholders. Okay. Well, thank you all. I just wanted to bring everybody up to date. As I mentioned earlier, there will not be a forum next month. We instead will be doing a interest group meeting where we'll be basically wrapping up the project for the year and kind of going over, not just for the year, but for the project, and going over the resources we've developed and what's available. And if we are renewed, maybe touch on what some next steps might be. And there will be no December forum or interest group. We always try, and it just doesn't work between Thanksgiving and Christmas and everybody else trying to jam their meetings in there. So hopefully we'll be back in January, depending on how contracting goes. And if not, we'll talk to you in November. Any last questions, comments? I still see that some. I see Jennifer still has some questions, and Jennifer, I'm going to encourage you to follow up with, I don't know if there's a gypsy contractor that you work with directly or not, but again, we appreciate your input, your insights, and as always, when we learn about these regional projects, or regional meaning multi-state or regional meaning within your state, I think we learn a little bit more about stakeholder needs, and I know that that is the primary objective of all of you, is to meet those stakeholder needs. Thank you all again. A special thanks to both Alfredo and Diava about on presenting and sharing this project with them. A few of the lessons I took away are the value of having a lead agency, especially one that is capable and interested and willing to work across state boundaries. And hats off to you all for stepping up when you lost your funding and putting it back together. So with that said, I'm going to thank you all, and we hopefully will see you next month at the November 20th interest group meeting. Thanks again for a great presentation, and thanks to the community for the great input. Well done.